The intercepted radio transmission crackled through the speakers at Central Command, the enemy's voice trembling with something that sounded like genuine fear. She moves like smoke through our defenses. Our best sentries never see her coming. The locals, they whisper about a phantom who strikes without warning and vanishes without a trace. Command, we need immediate reinforcement. The ghost is hunting us. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Colonel Harrison leaned back in his chair, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. 6 months ago, that same woman had been standing in his office, tears threatening to spill down her cheeks as he handed her discharge papers. The woman they'd called worthless, hopeless, a waste of military resources. The woman who couldn't even complete basic obstacle courses without falling behind. Now, enemy intelligence was requesting backup specifically because of her. The Georgia's sun beat down mercilessly on Camp Davidson as Elena Vasquez stepped off the transport bus, her single duffel bag slung over her shoulder like a question mark. At 28, she was nearly a decade older than most of the fresh-faced recruits milling around the registration tables, their excited chatter filling the humid air with nervous energy. While they compared their shiny new gear and swapped stories about why they'd enlisted, Elena quietly observed everything with the kind of stillness that made people uncomfortable. She'd grown up in the borderlands of New Mexico, where patience wasn't just a virtue, but a survival skill. Her grandfather had taught her to track desert animals by reading the stories written in disturbed sand and bent grass. Her grandmother had shown her how to move through the desert at night, stepping lightly enough to avoid rattlesnakes and quietly enough to avoid detection by Border Patrol agents who might ask uncomfortable questions about documentation. These weren't skills that translated well to military aptitude tests or physical fitness standards, but they were the foundation of who Elena had become. The other recruits wore their motivations like badges of honor. Tommy Richardson from Alabama wanted to follow his father's footsteps into the Marines. Jessica Park from California was working toward college money and citizenship. Marcus Williams from Detroit talked constantly about proving himself worthy of something bigger than his neighborhood offered. Elena kept her reasons to herself, though the careful observer might have noticed how she unconsciously touched the small silver cross at her throat whenever someone asked why she'd enlisted at her age. Drill Sergeant Morrison's voice cut through the morning heat like a blade. "Listen up, maggots. For the next 12 weeks, this place is going to break you down and build you back up into something resembling soldiers. Some of you think you're tough. Some of you think you're smart. All of you are wrong until I tell you otherwise." His eyes swept the formation and stopped on Elena, taking in her weathered boots, her careful posture, and the way she seemed to be cataloging every detail of her surroundings rather than hanging on his every word. "Vasquez," he barked, making several recruits jump. "You got something more interesting to look at than me?" "No, Drill Sergeant," Elena replied, her voice carrying just enough of her grandmother's accent to make it clear she wasn't from anywhere most of these soldiers had ever been. "Where you from, Vasquez?" "New Mexico, Drill Sergeant." Morrison's expression suggested he wasn't sure if New Mexico counted as a real state. "Well, New Mexico, let's see if you can keep up with the real Americans." The comment drew snickers from some of the other recruits, though a few shifted uncomfortably. Elena's expression didn't change, but something in her dark eyes grew very still. The first week revealed everything the other recruits needed to know about Elena Vasquez. During morning calisthenics, while the 18-year-olds bounced through push-ups and jumping jacks with youthful energy, Elena moved with deliberate precision but obvious effort. Her form was perfect, but her endurance lagged behind even the most out-of-shape recruits. When they ran the morning miles, she consistently finished in the bottom quarter, her face flushed and her breathing labored, while others barely seemed winded. "Turtle," someone whispered during the third day's cool-down stretch. "Look at Turtle trying to keep up." The nickname spread through the barracks faster than gossip, and by the end of the week, even some of the drill instructors were using it. Elena never responded to the taunts, never defended herself, never tried to explain that her body had been shaped by different demands than theirs. She simply continued moving forward, one careful step at a time. The obstacle course became Elena's daily humiliation, While recruits like Tommy Richardson sailed over walls and swung across rope bridges with athletic confidence, Elena approached each obstacle like a puzzle that needed solving rather than a challenge to be conquered. She was methodical where others were explosive, careful where others were bold. Her technique was often flawless, but her speed was consistently inadequate. Drill Sergeant Morrison made sure everyone noticed. "Vasquez, my grandmother could complete this course faster, and she's been dead for 15 years. His voice carried across the training field, ensuring that Elena's struggles became everyone's entertainment. "Maybe we should get you a walker to help you navigate those rope climbs." What Morrison and the other recruits didn't see were the details Elena noticed that they missed entirely. She observed how the obstacle course's wooden planks had different grain patterns that affected grip in humid weather. She noticed which rope segments had been recently replaced and which were beginning to fray. She cataloged the way shadows moved across the course throughout the day, creating blind spots and advantages that changed with the sun's position. Elena was learning the course in a way that none of the faster recruits bothered to, but her careful observations looked like hesitation to instructors focused on stopwatch times. The shooting range provided no relief from Elena's reputation as the company weakling. While she could hit targets with reasonable accuracy, her deliberate aiming process took too long for military standards. Other recruits rapid-fired through ammunition exercises, while Elena lined up each shot like she was hunting for survival rather than competing for scores. Her groupings were tight and centered, but her rate of fire put her consistently at the bottom of the rankings. "Vasquez," Sergeant Palmer called out during weapons training. "This isn't a meditation retreat. In combat, you'll have seconds to identify and engage targets. Your careful little aiming ritual will get you and your squad mates killed." Elena absorbed the criticism without comment, though those watching closely might have noticed how her jaw tightened slightly each time someone suggested her methods were wrong, rather than simply different. Tommy Richardson took particular pleasure in Elena's struggles. He'd been a high school football star before enlisting, and military training felt like a natural extension of his competitive nature. "Hey, Turtle," he'd say during mess hall meals, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "Maybe you should transfer to the Air Force. I hear they let you sit down while you work." His comments always drew laughter, and Elena's silence seemed to encourage more elaborate taunts. "I bet she's never even seen real combat," Jessica Park whispered to her bunkmates one evening. "Probably grew up somewhere so safe she thinks loud noises are scary." The irony of a suburban California teenager making assumptions about a woman who'd grown up dodging cartel activity and border conflicts was lost on everyone present, including Jessica herself. Elena's bunk was positioned near the back of the barracks, which suited her preference for observing rather than participating in the social dynamics that developed among the recruits. From her corner, she could watch the hierarchies form and shift, could see who emerged as natural leaders and who fell into follower roles. She noticed which recruits helped each other with difficult concepts and which ones hoarded knowledge to maintain advantages. Most importantly, she began to understand the unspoken rules that governed military life, rules that had nothing to do with the official regulations and everything to do with human nature. During evening cleaning duties, while other recruits rushed through their assigned tasks to maximize free time, Elena cleaned with the same methodical precision she brought to everything else. Her area was always spotless, her gear was always perfectly arranged, and her bed passed inspection every morning without exception. The other recruits began to notice that Elena's consistent attention to detail meant she rarely faced punishment duties that plagued soldiers who cut corners, but they interpreted her success as luck rather than skill. The most telling moment of Elena's first month came during a navigation exercise in the dense forest surrounding Camp Davidson. Teams of 4 recruits were given maps, compasses, and coordinates for 3 checkpoints they needed to reach within a 6-hour window. Elena's team included Tommy Richardson, who'd assumed leadership based on his athletic confidence, Jessica Park, who'd volunteered to be the team's navigator despite having no actual experience with wilderness navigation, and Marcus Williams, who followed along enthusiastically but contributed little to the planning process. Tommy's approach was direct and aggressive. He wanted to move fast, cover ground quickly, and rely on their physical fitness to make up for any navigational errors. Jessica agreed, confident that her college education made her naturally better at reading maps than anyone else on the team. Marcus simply wanted to avoid conflict and supported whatever the majority decided. Elena suggested they take time to study the topographical features and plan their route more carefully. but her voice was drowned out by the others' enthusiasm for immediate action. 3 hours into the exercise, after 2 false starts and 1 significant detour that cost them valuable time, the team was lost in dense undergrowth with no clear idea of their location. Tommy's confidence had evaporated into frustrated anger. Jessica's map-reading skills had proven inadequate for actual wilderness navigation, and Marcus was beginning to panic about the consequences of failing the exercise. Elena had remained quiet through their struggles, following along without complaint even as she watched them make choices she knew were wrong. "We're going to fail because of this," Tommy snapped, sweat streaming down his face as he stared at the map that might as well have been written in hieroglyphics. "Someone needs to figure out where we are before we run out of time completely." Elena looked up at the canopy above them, noting the way sunlight filtered through the leaves in the direction of moss growth on the tree trunks. She'd been tracking their approximate location despite the team's erratic path, using skills her grandfather had taught her during childhood hunting trips that had nothing to do with military training, and everything to do with understanding how to read the language of the land itself. "I think we're here," she said quietly, pointing to a spot on the map that was roughly 2 miles from where Jessica thought they were located. Tommy looked at her with undisguised skepticism. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Based on what? You haven't been paying attention to navigation at all." Elena pointed to a distinctive rock formation visible through the trees, then traced a line on the map showing how it corresponded to the topographical markings. She explained how the slope of the ground they'd been walking matched the elevation lines, and how the sound of water in the distance indicated they were near the stream marked on their route. Her explanation was detailed, accurate, and demonstrated a level of environmental awareness that none of her teammates possessed. The checkpoint they needed to reach was exactly where Elena had calculated it would be. They arrived with 40 minutes to spare, and their final navigation time put them in the top quarter of all teams. Tommy and Jessica accepted the praise from their instructors without mentioning Elena's contribution, and Marcus was too relieved at their success to think about giving credit where it was due. Elena didn't expect recognition and didn't ask for it, but the pattern was established. Her skills were useful when others needed them, but invisible when it came time for acknowledgement. Back in the barracks that evening, Elena overheard Tommy talking to another group of recruits about their navigation success. "Yeah, we crushed that exercise," he said, conveniently omitting the part where they'd been completely lost until Elena's intervention. "Some teams are still out there wandering around in circles. Good thing our team knew what we were doing from the start." Elena lay on her bunk, staring at the ceiling and listening to the embellished version of events that positioned Tommy as a natural leader and navigation expert. She'd learned something important during their time in the woods, something that had nothing to do with map reading or compass bearings. She'd learned that her teammates were perfectly willing to benefit from her knowledge while simultaneously dismissing her capabilities. It was a lesson that would prove more valuable than anything taught in official training sessions. The weeks that followed established Elena's position within the company hierarchy. She was the reliable soldier who could be counted on to complete tasks correctly, but who lacked the speed and aggression that military culture valued most. Her careful methods were seen as hesitation, her thoughtful approach was interpreted as indecision, and her quiet competence was overshadowed by the louder confidence of recruits who made mistakes more boldly. Drill Sergeant Morrison's evaluations consistently ranked Elena as adequate but uninspiring. "Vasquez meets minimum standards," he wrote in her weekly assessment, "demonstrates attention to detail and follows orders without complaint. However, shows insufficient aggression and lacks the quick decision-making skills necessary for combat effectiveness. Recommend for support roles rather than frontline assignments." Elena read her evaluation without surprise or visible emotion. She'd spent enough time observing Morrison to understand that his definition of military excellence favored traits she didn't naturally possess and couldn't easily fake. She was methodical where he wanted explosive, careful where he wanted aggressive, and quiet where he wanted commanding. In Morrison's framework, these differences made her fundamentally unsuited for the warrior role that boot camp was designed to create. What Morrison didn't recognize, and what Elena was beginning to understand about herself, was that different didn't necessarily mean inferior. The skills that made her seem slow and hesitant in boot camp's artificial environment were the same skills that had kept her family safe during her childhood's very real dangers. The patience that frustrated her instructors was the same patience that had allowed her to track wounded animals across miles of desert terrain. The quiet observation that looked like disengagement was the same quality that had taught her to recognize threats before they became critical. Elena's final weeks at Camp Davidson were marked by a growing certainty that she would never fit into the military's conventional mold. She continued to improve gradually in physical fitness and weapons training, but her progress was steady rather than dramatic, careful rather than impressive. Other recruits began receiving informal promises about preferred assignments and advanced training opportunities, while Elena's name never came up in discussions about high-potential soldiers. The irony was that Elena was learning more about actual military effectiveness than many of her faster, stronger, more aggressive classmates. She understood how to move quietly through different types of terrain, how to observe without being noticed, how to gather information without revealing her own position, and how to remain calm and functional when others were panicking. These were not skills that showed up on fitness tests or marksmanship scores, but they were exactly the skills that would prove invaluable in the real world beyond boot camp's controlled environment. As graduation approached, Elena knew that her military career would likely be short and unremarkable. She'd probably be assigned to some support role where her methodical nature would be tolerated rather than celebrated, where she could contribute quietly without challenging anyone's assumptions about what soldiers should look like or how they should perform. She'd serve her time, learn what she could, and eventually return to civilian life with the knowledge that she'd tried and been found wanting by military standards. Elena had no way of knowing that her quiet competence had been noticed by someone who understood its value, someone who was looking for exactly the kind of soldier that conventional training consistently overlooked and undervalued. She didn't know that her future would require every skill that boot camp had dismissed as inadequate, and that the enemy would learn to fear the very qualities that had made her instructors write her off as hopeless. The woman they called Turtle was about to discover that slow and steady doesn't just win races. Sometimes, it wins wars. The crushing defeat. The final evaluation at Camp Davidson was designed to test everything the recruits had learned over 12 grueling weeks. Operation Iron Wolf would simulate a complex combat scenario where teams of soldiers had to infiltrate enemy territory, gather intelligence, and extract safely within a 72-hour window. Success required physical endurance, tactical thinking, weapons proficiency, and the ability to work under extreme pressure. For Elena Vasquez, it represented her last chance to prove she belonged in the military. The briefing room buzzed with nervous energy as Captain Reynolds outlined the mission parameters. Each team would be dropped at different locations around a 50-square-mile training area that had been transformed into hostile territory, complete with opposing force soldiers, electronic surveillance, and realistic combat scenarios. Teams needed to reach 3 designated intelligence gathering points, collect specific information, and make it to an extraction zone without being captured or eliminated by the opposing forces. Elena found herself assigned to Team Delta alongside 3 recruits who had consistently outperformed her throughout training. Sarah Chen was a former college athlete whose natural leadership abilities had made her a standout candidate for officer training. Michael Torres brought urban warfare experience from growing up in gang territory, giving him street smarts that translated well to military tactics. David Kim had scored highest in the company on technical assessments and electronic warfare training. Elena was clearly the weak link in a team of high achievers. "All right, team," Sarah announced as they reviewed their mission packets. "We need to move fast and hit hard. The opposing forces are going to be tracking multiple teams, so speed is our best advantage. We get in, grab the intel, and get out before they can coordinate a response." Her confidence was infectious, and both Michael and David nodded enthusiastically. Elena studied the topographical maps more carefully, noting terrain features that could provide concealment or complicate movement, but kept her observations to herself. The first intelligence point was located in a mock village, constructed deep in the training area. Teams were expected to infiltrate the settlement, locate a specific building, photograph documents, and escape without alerting the opposing force soldiers patrolling the area. Sarah's plan was characteristically direct: move quickly under cover of darkness, use their superior physical conditioning to outmaneuver any pursuit, and rely on David's technical skills to bypass any electronic security measures. Elena suggested they spend additional time observing the target before attempting infiltration, pointing out that hasty movement might trigger security measures they hadn't anticipated. Sarah dismissed the suggestion with barely concealed impatience. "Vasquez, we don't have time for your usual overthinking. The other teams are probably already moving on their objectives. We need to act decisively. The infiltration began smoothly enough. Under Sarah's leadership, the team moved through the forest with military precision, covering ground quickly while maintaining tactical formation. Elena found herself struggling to match their pace, her shorter stride and different conditioning, making her a constant drag on the group's movement speed. Michael and David exchanged frustrated glances as they repeatedly had to slow down or wait for Elena to catch up, and Sarah's encouraging words carried an edge of annoyance that grew sharper with each delay. They reached the village perimeter just before midnight, taking position on a hillside that provided clear observation of the target building. Elena immediately began studying the patrol patterns of the opposing force soldiers, noting the timing of their movements and identifying gaps in their coverage. She observed that the electronic sensors appeared to be focused on the main approaches to the village, leaving potential blind spots along the eastern edge, where natural terrain features provided concealment. Sarah was already preparing for immediate action. "David, how long do you need to disable their perimeter sensors?" "Michael, can you identify the best approach route for a fast insertion?" Elena tried to share her observations about the patrol patterns and sensor placement, but Sarah cut her off. "Vasquez, just stay ready to follow our lead. We've got this handled." The team's approach was tactically sound and executed with impressive skill. David successfully bypassed the electronic perimeter defenses. Michael identified a route that avoided the obvious choke points, and Sarah coordinated their movement with precision timing. Elena followed along, her careful observation of details seemingly unnecessary given her teammates' competent performance. They reached the target building, photographed the required documents, and began their extraction without apparent detection. The problems began during their withdrawal from the village. In their focus on speed and efficiency, the team had missed subtle signs that Elena had noticed, but hadn't been given the opportunity to share. The opposing force had anticipated multiple infiltration attempts and had positioned reaction teams in locations that weren't obvious from initial reconnaissance. Sarah's rapid extraction route led them directly into a carefully prepared ambush. The simulated firefight was brief and decisive. Blank ammunition and laser tag equipment provided realistic feedback, as Elena watched her teammates get systematically eliminated by opponents who had predicted their most likely escape routes. Sarah's aggressive leadership, Michael's street-smart tactics, and David's technical expertise all proved inadequate against an enemy who had planned for exactly their type of approach. Elena found herself alone in hostile territory, her teammates dead according to the exercise rules, with opposing force soldiers actively hunting for any remaining team members. Her careful observations during the infiltration phase suddenly became invaluable. She knew which routes the enemy hadn't covered, understood the timing of their patrol rotations, and had identified terrain features that could provide concealment during daylight hours. For the next 18 hours, Elena played an elaborate game of hide-and-seek with professional soldiers whose job was to find and eliminate her. She moved slowly and deliberately, using every technique her grandfather had taught her about reading terrain and avoiding detection. She found water sources that weren't marked on maps, located concealed positions that provided rest and observation opportunities, and gradually worked her way toward the second intelligence objective while avoiding the search teams that were methodically sweeping the area. The second intelligence point was located at a communications relay station positioned on high ground that provided excellent observation of the surrounding area. Reaching it required crossing open terrain that was heavily monitored by opposing force observers equipped with long-range surveillance equipment. Elena spent 6 hours studying the site from concealed positions, mapping the observer locations, timing their attention patterns, and identifying brief windows when sections of the approach route were unmonitored. Her infiltration of the communications site took nearly 4 hours of painstaking movement. Where other teams might have attempted a rapid assault or tried to overwhelm the defenses with speed and aggression, Elena used patience and stealth to gradually work her way past each layer of security. She moved during moments when observers were focused elsewhere, used natural camouflage to blend with the terrain, and advanced only when she was certain her movement wouldn't be detected. The intelligence gathering itself required photographing technical specifications displayed on computer screens inside the relay station. Elena had to enter the building, locate the correct terminals, capture the required images, and exit without triggering any of the security systems or alerting the opposing force personnel stationed nearby. Her methodical approach to the task took longer than the exercise parameters expected, but she completed the objective successfully while maintaining complete stealth. The third intelligence objective presented the greatest challenge. Located in a heavily fortified compound that simulated an enemy command center, the site was defended by multiple layers of security, including electronic surveillance, roving patrols, fixed observation posts, and quick reaction forces positioned to respond to any infiltration attempts. Most teams were expected to approach this objective with full squads, using coordinated tactics to overwhelm the defenses through superior numbers and firepower. Elena was now operating alone, 36 hours into an exercise that had already eliminated most of the other teams. She was exhausted, hungry, and facing a target that seemed impossible for a single operator to penetrate successfully. The rational choice would have been to attempt the objective, accept failure, and extract to the designated safety zone with partial credit for completing 2 of the 3 required tasks. Instead, Elena spent 12 hours conducting detailed reconnaissance of the compound. She mapped every patrol route, identified every sensor placement, tracked the timing of guard rotations, and located vulnerabilities in the defensive perimeter that weren't apparent from casual observation. She discovered that the compound's designers had focused on preventing vehicular assault and coordinated infantry attacks, but had left small gaps in their coverage that a single, patient infiltrator might be able to exploit. Her approach to the compound took 8 hours of careful movement. Elena used drainage ditches, natural depressions, and abandoned equipment to provide concealment as she worked her way past each defensive layer. She moved only during periods when multiple factors aligned in her favor: guard rotations, electronic sensor cycles, and natural conditions that reduced visibility for the defenders. Her progress was measured in yards per hour rather than the rapid advancement that military doctrine typically emphasized. The final intelligence gathering required accessing a computer terminal in the compound's central command building. Elena had to penetrate the building itself, locate the correct workstation, download encrypted files to a portable storage device, and escape without detection. The task required not just stealth but also technical skills that hadn't been emphasized during her training. She spent 40 minutes working with unfamiliar software systems, following procedures she'd observed David performing but had never practiced herself. When Elena finally extracted from the compound with the required intelligence, she had been operating continuously for 68 hours with minimal food, water, or rest. She made her way to the designated extraction point, expecting to find other successful teams waiting for pickup. Instead, she discovered that Team Delta had been the last remaining unit in the exercise. Every other team had been eliminated or had withdrawn after completing only partial objectives. The debriefing session that followed Elena's extraction was unlike anything the instructors had experienced during previous training cycles. Captain Reynolds reviewed her performance with a mixture of professional admiration and personal bewilderment. Elena had completed all 3 intelligence objectives while operating as a single person, had avoided detection throughout the entire exercise, and had demonstrated capabilities that none of her previous evaluations had suggested she possessed. "Vasquez," Captain Reynolds said, studying the detailed timeline of her movements, "your approach to this exercise was completely outside normal tactical parameters. You took 4 times longer than projected for each objective, used none of the standard infiltration techniques we've taught, and operated with a level of patience that borders on the extreme. How do you explain this performance?" Elena's response was characteristically quiet and direct. "Sir, I used the methods that seemed most likely to succeed given the specific conditions and opposition we faced. Speed wasn't as important as avoiding detection, so I prioritized stealth over rapid movement." Her explanation was accurate but failed to capture the full scope of what she had accomplished or the skills she had demonstrated. The other instructors were less diplomatic in their assessment. Drill Sergeant Morrison remained convinced that Elena's success was largely due to luck and the unusual circumstances of operating alone after her team's elimination. "Any soldier can hide and sneak around if they're not worried about accomplishing their mission quickly," he argued. In real combat, Vasquez's methods would get people killed while she's taking her sweet time to line up perfect shots. Sarah Chen's debriefing painted Elena's performance in an even more negative light. "Vasquez slowed down our entire operation from the beginning," she reported. Her hesitation and overthinking prevented us from moving decisively when speed was essential. If she had been more aggressive and confident, our team might have completed the mission successfully, instead of getting ambushed during extraction. The official evaluation of Elena's performance reflected the military's institutional bias toward conventional metrics of success. While her completion of all objectives was noted as exceptional, her methods were characterized as unsuitable for standard military operations. The assessment concluded that Elena's approach demonstrated individual capability but poor teamwork skills, tactical thinking that was too cautious for combat effectiveness, and leadership potential that was insufficient for advanced training opportunities. Elena received her final scores during a ceremony where the top performers were recognized for their achievements and given first choice of advanced training assignments. Sarah Chen was selected for Officer Candidate School, Michael Torres was offered specialized urban warfare training, and David Kim was accepted into the military's elite electronic warfare program. Elena's name was called near the end of the ceremony, where she learned that her assignment would be to a logistics support unit stationed at a remote base in Alaska. The assignment was clearly a dead-end posting for soldiers who had completed basic training but shown insufficient potential for combat roles or advanced specialization. Elena would spend her military service managing supply inventories, maintaining equipment, and performing administrative duties that utilized none of the skills she had demonstrated during the final exercise. It was a career path that promised steady employment but no opportunity for advancement, challenge, or meaningful contribution to military operations. Elena accepted her assignment without complaint or visible disappointment, though those who knew her well might have noticed the slight tension in her shoulders as she received the paperwork. She had proven herself capable of extraordinary achievement under the most challenging conditions, only to discover that her methods were too different from military norms to be valued or understood by the institution she had hoped to serve. The irony was that Elena's performance during Operation Iron Wolf had demonstrated exactly the skills that special operations units spent years trying to develop in their personnel. Her ability to operate independently for extended periods, to gather intelligence without detection, to adapt tactics to specific conditions rather than following standardized procedures, and to maintain effectiveness under extreme stress were all capabilities that elite military units considered invaluable. But these qualities were invisible to instructors focused on conventional measures of military excellence. As Elena packed her belongings for the journey to Alaska, she reflected on the gap between what she had accomplished and how that accomplishment was being interpreted by others. She had succeeded where entire teams had failed, had demonstrated capabilities that exceeded anything her previous training had suggested she possessed, and had proven that her careful, methodical approach could achieve results that speed and aggression could not. Yet she was being rewarded with an assignment that would waste, rather than develop her potential. Elena's fellow recruits offered perfunctory congratulations on her assignment, but their comments revealed their true assessment of her career prospects. "Alaska sounds nice and quiet," Tommy Richardson said with barely concealed condescension. "Probably a good fit for someone who likes to take their time with everything." Jessica Park added her own observation. "At least you'll be somewhere your slow pace won't hold back any real soldiers." The comments stung not because they were intended to be cruel, but because they reflected a fundamental misunderstanding of what Elena had achieved and what she was capable of contributing. Her classmates saw her assignment as confirmation that their earlier assessments had been correct. Elena was a mediocre soldier who lacked the qualities necessary for important military roles. They had no way of understanding that her methodical approach and patient observation skills were exactly what certain specialized roles required. Elena's final night at Camp Davidson was spent alone, as it had been most nights during her training. She wrote a letter to her grandmother, describing her experiences without revealing her disappointment or the institutional barriers she had encountered. She mentioned that she would be working in logistics, which was true enough, and that her training had taught her valuable lessons about leadership and teamwork, which was also true, though not in the way her instructors had intended. As Elena prepared for sleep, she had no way of knowing that her performance during Operation Iron Wolf had been observed by someone whose job was to identify exactly the kind of unconventional talent that standard military training consistently overlooked. She didn't know that a copy of her exercise debriefing had been forwarded to a classified program that specialized in developing soldiers whose skills were too unusual for conventional units. She had no idea that her apparent career dead end was actually the first step toward opportunities that would challenge every assumption her instructors had made about her potential and her worth. The woman they called Turtle was about to discover that sometimes the military's greatest failures of imagination become its most valuable successes, and that the soldiers who don't fit standard molds are often exactly the ones who can accomplish impossible missions that conventional thinking cannot even envision. The silent mastery Fort Richardson, Alaska, existed at the edge of civilization, where the military's presence served more as a symbolic gesture than a strategic necessity. The base processed supplies for scattered installations across the Alaskan wilderness, maintained equipment that civilian contractors couldn't reach, and provided administrative support for operations that most soldiers never heard about. For Elena Vasquez, it represented professional exile disguised as a duty assignment. Master Sergeant Janet Crawford ran the logistics operations with the efficiency of someone who had learned to make the most of limited resources and overlooked personnel. She had served 23 years in various supply chain roles, watching talented soldiers get assigned to her unit because they had somehow failed to impress the officers who controlled career advancement. Crawford had developed a keen eye for distinguishing between genuine incompetence and institutional misunderstanding. Elena's arrival at Fort Richardson came with paperwork that painted her as a marginally adequate soldier, whose performance had been sufficient for graduation but insufficient for meaningful responsibility. Crawford read between the lines of Elena's evaluation reports, noting the consistent pattern of technical competence overshadowed by criticism of her leadership style and tactical approach. She had seen similar assessments before, usually involving soldiers whose capabilities didn't match conventional expectations. "Vasquez," Crawford said during Elena's initial briefing, "your records suggest you're methodical and detail-oriented. Those are useful qualities in logistics work, even if they apparently weren't appreciated in infantry training. I'm assigning you to equipment maintenance and inventory management. It's not glamorous work, but it's important, and I expect you to take it seriously." Elena's responsibilities involved maintaining and tracking thousands of pieces of equipment that supported operations across Alaska's vast wilderness. She managed communications gear for remote installations, maintained weapon systems for units that operated in extreme weather conditions, and coordinated supply deliveries to locations that could only be reached by helicopter or snowmobile during certain seasons. The work required meticulous attention to detail, systematic organization, and the ability to anticipate needs before they became critical shortages. Within weeks, Elena had revolutionized the inventory system using methods that reflected her characteristic approach to complex problems. Instead of relying solely on computer databases and standardized procedures, she developed a comprehensive understanding of how equipment actually performed under Alaskan conditions. She tracked failure patterns that corresponded to specific weather events, identified maintenance requirements that weren't covered in official technical manuals, and established relationships with field personnel who could provide real-world feedback about equipment effectiveness. Elena's unofficial modifications to standard procedures began small but quickly demonstrated their value. She started pre-positioning certain types of equipment at forward locations based on seasonal patterns she had identified, reducing emergency resupply requests by 40%. She developed maintenance schedules that accounted for the unique stresses of Arctic operations, extending equipment life and reducing replacement costs. Most importantly, she created detailed documentation that captured institutional knowledge about operating in extreme conditions, information that had previously existed only in the memories of experienced personnel. Master Sergeant Crawford noticed the improvements but initially attributed them to Elena's general competence rather than any exceptional capability. "Vasquez is a solid worker," she reported during quarterly evaluations. "Shows good attention to detail and follows procedures consistently. No complaints about her performance or attitude." The praise was genuine but failed to recognize the innovative thinking behind Elena's systematic improvements. Elena's real education began when she started supporting classified operations that originated from Fort Richardson but extended throughout the Pacific Theater. Her security clearance allowed her access to mission planning documents that revealed the scope and complexity of military activities that the general public never knew existed. She learned about reconnaissance missions in disputed territories, intelligence gathering operations that required months of patient observation, and special operations that succeeded or failed based on the quality of their logistical support. The first indication that Elena's skills might be valuable beyond routine supply management came during a crisis involving a reconnaissance team operating near the Bering Strait. Communication with the team had been lost for over 72 hours. Their scheduled resupply drop had been missed due to weather conditions, and their planned extraction was now impossible because of unexpected ice formations that had blocked their designated pickup zone. Colonel Marcus Webb, the officer responsible for special operations in the region, called an emergency briefing to coordinate rescue efforts. Elena found herself included in the meeting not because of her operational expertise, but because she managed the equipment records that might help identify the team's current capabilities and limitations. Her presence was intended to be purely administrative, providing technical specifications and inventory status when requested. As Elena listened to the discussion, she realized that the rescue planning was based on assumptions about the team's location and condition that might not be accurate. The planners were using standard search patterns and conventional extraction methods, but Elena's detailed knowledge of Arctic conditions and equipment performance suggested that alternative approaches might be more effective. She studied the topographical maps being used for the rescue operation and noticed terrain features that weren't being considered in the tactical planning. Elena's first contribution to the discussion was a quiet observation about cold weather equipment performance. She noted that the reconnaissance team's radio batteries would have degraded significantly in the extreme temperatures they were experiencing, which might explain the communication loss without indicating that the team was in immediate danger. Her technical knowledge allowed her to calculate approximately how long their equipment would remain functional, providing a timeline for rescue efforts that was more optimistic than the worst-case scenarios being considered. Colonel Webb asked Elena to expand on her assessment, and she found herself explaining the complex relationships between temperature, equipment performance, and operational capabilities in Arctic conditions. Her analysis suggested that the reconnaissance team was probably still operational but unable to communicate effectively, that their planned extraction zone was indeed inaccessible, but that alternative locations might be viable, and that their current position could be estimated based on logical responses to the weather conditions they had encountered. Elena's insights led to a modified search plan that focused on areas where the team would most likely have sought shelter from the storm. Her recommendations about equipment capabilities helped the rescue coordinators understand what resources the team probably still had available and what they would need from any resupply effort. Most importantly, her analysis of terrain features identified potential extraction points that offered better access than the original plan while still being reachable by the reconnaissance team. The rescue operation succeeded beyond expectations. The reconnaissance team was located exactly where Elena's analysis had predicted they would be. Their condition matched her assessment of their equipment capabilities, and the alternative extraction site she had recommended proved ideal for helicopter operations despite not being included in standard operating procedures. The team members later reported that they had been following exactly the logical sequence of decisions that Elena had outlined during the planning session. Colonel Webb's debriefing of the operation focused heavily on Elena's analytical contributions. Specialist Vasquez demonstrated an understanding of Arctic operations that exceeded anything I've seen from personnel with years of field experience, he reported. Her technical knowledge, combined with tactical thinking and environmental awareness, provided insights that were crucial to mission success. The assessment was a dramatic departure from the lukewarm evaluations Elena had received throughout her military career. Elena's involvement in the rescue operation marked the beginning of her transformation from administrative support to operational advisor. Colonel Webb began consulting her about other special operations in the region, initially for technical advice about equipment and logistics, but increasingly for her strategic insights about operating in extreme environments. Elena found herself reviewing mission plans, identifying potential complications that weren't obvious to planners with conventional training, and suggesting modifications that improved operational effectiveness. The pattern of Elena's contributions remained consistent with her personality and training. She approached each mission analysis with systematic thoroughness, studying not just the official objectives but also the environmental conditions, equipment limitations, and human factors that could affect outcomes. Her recommendations were always detailed, carefully reasoned, and focused on reducing risks rather than maximizing speed or aggression. Her methods consistently improved mission success rates while reducing casualties and equipment losses. Elena's growing reputation for operational insight led to requests for her analysis from other commands throughout the Pacific region. Officers who had never met her began forwarding mission plans for her review, seeking her perspective on operations that involved extreme weather conditions, extended periods of isolation, or requirements for stealth and patience rather than direct confrontation. Her written assessments became valued documents that influenced planning at levels far above her official rank and position. The transformation in how others perceived Elena's capabilities was gradual, but unmistakable. Master Sergeant Crawford began describing her as invaluable rather than merely competent. Colonel Webb recommended her for advanced training opportunities that had nothing to do with logistics and everything to do with operational planning and intelligence analysis. Even officers who had never worked with her directly began referencing her assessments when planning their own operations. Elena's personal development during this period was equally significant. For the first time in her military career, she was working in an environment where her natural approaches to problem-solving were valued, rather than criticized. Her patience was seen as thoroughness, her caution was interpreted as prudent risk assessment, and her quiet observation skills were recognized as exceptional situational awareness. She discovered that she possessed tactical and strategic thinking abilities that her previous training had never allowed her to demonstrate. The most important aspect of Elena's growth was her increasing confidence in her own judgment. Throughout basic training and infantry school, she had been told repeatedly that her instincts were wrong, her methods were inappropriate, and her thinking was too slow for military effectiveness. Working with special operations personnel who valued careful analysis and methodical planning, Elena began to trust her own assessment of situations and to speak up when she disagreed with conventional approaches. Elena's first direct challenge to established military thinking came during planning for a reconnaissance mission in disputed waters near the Aleutian Islands. The mission required placing a small team on a remote island to monitor shipping activity and report on potential military installations being constructed by foreign powers. The standard approach involved rapid insertion via helicopter, establishment of an observation post, and extraction after a predetermined time period. Elena's analysis of the mission plan identified several problems with the conventional approach. The helicopter insertion would be easily detected by the sophisticated surveillance equipment that foreign powers were known to operate in the region. The predetermined timeline for the mission didn't account for weather patterns that could prevent extraction for weeks beyond the planned duration. Most critically, the observation post location chosen for tactical convenience wouldn't provide adequate coverage of the shipping lanes that were the mission's primary intelligence target. Elena's alternative proposal was characteristically methodical and patient. She recommended infiltrating the island using small boats during a weather window that would mask their approach from surveillance systems. She suggested establishing multiple observation positions that could be rotated based on weather conditions and surveillance threats. Most importantly, she proposed extending the mission duration to cover a full seasonal cycle of shipping activity, providing intelligence that would be far more valuable than the snapshot that a brief mission could provide. The reaction to Elena's proposal was mixed. Some officers appreciated her thorough analysis and the potential for gathering superior intelligence through her extended observation approach. Others worried that her methods were too slow and cautious for the rapidly changing conditions that characterized modern intelligence gathering. The debate revealed fundamental differences in military philosophy between those who prioritized speed and those who valued thoroughness. Colonel Webb supported Elena's approach after reviewing her detailed justification for each recommendation. He recognized that her proposal addressed mission requirements more effectively than standard procedures, even though it challenged conventional thinking about timing and methodology. His endorsement of Elena's plan marked the first time in her military career that her alternative methods had been chosen over established doctrine. The mission that followed proved Elena's analysis correct in every significant detail. The team successfully infiltrated the island without detection, established observation posts that provided comprehensive coverage of the target area, and gathered intelligence over several months that revealed patterns of activity invisible to shorter surveillance efforts. The information they collected led to significant policy decisions and demonstrated the value of patient, methodical intelligence gathering in an era dominated by satellite imagery and electronic surveillance. Elena's success with the reconnaissance mission established her reputation as someone whose unconventional thinking could produce exceptional results. She began receiving assignments that specifically required her analytical approach. Missions where patience was more valuable than speed, where careful observation was more important than direct action, and where success depended on understanding complex environmental and human factors rather than overwhelming opposition with superior firepower. The transformation in Elena's career trajectory was remarkable but not immediately obvious to outside observers. Her official rank and position remained unchanged, her duty assignment was still listed as logistics support, and her personnel file continued to reflect the mediocre evaluations she had received during basic training. However, her actual responsibilities had evolved far beyond routine supply management to encompass operational planning, intelligence analysis, and strategic assessment at levels that exceeded the authority typically associated with her rank. Elena's influence on military operations in the Pacific region became extensive, but largely invisible. Her assessments shaped mission planning for operations she would never directly participate in. Her recommendations influenced equipment procurement decisions that affected thousands of personnel, and her analytical methods were adopted by officers who applied her techniques without necessarily understanding their origins. She had become what military professionals call a force multiplier, someone whose contribution to organizational effectiveness far exceeds what their official position would suggest. The most significant aspect of Elena's development was her growing understanding of her own unique value within the military structure. She had learned that her careful, methodical approach wasn't a weakness to be overcome, but a strength to be leveraged for specific types of challenges. Her patient observation skills, systematic thinking, and environmental awareness were exactly what certain missions required, even if they weren't valued by conventional military training programs. Elena's confidence in her abilities was reinforced by consistent mission success and the growing respect of officers who understood the complexity of the challenges she was helping them address. She had found her niche within the military structure, a role that utilized her strengths rather than focusing on her weaknesses, and that allowed her to contribute meaningfully to operations that mattered. For the first time since enlisting, Elena felt that she was fulfilling her potential as a soldier rather than simply meeting minimum requirements. The stage was being set for Elena to transition from analytical support to direct operational involvement, though she didn't yet realize the full scope of the opportunities that were developing. Her reputation for solving impossible problems through patient analysis and unconventional thinking had reached the attention of organizations that specialized in missions where conventional approaches consistently failed. Elena was about to discover that her years of being dismissed as too slow and too cautious had actually been preparing her for challenges that required exactly those qualities. The ultimate test. The emergency briefing at Fort Richardson came without warning on a gray February morning when the temperature had dropped to minus 38 degrees and the aurora borealis painted the sky in sheets of green fire. Colonel Webb's urgent summons interrupted Elena's routine equipment inventory, pulling her into a secure conference room where she found herself facing a collection of officers whose rank insignia and unit patches indicated they represented organizations she had never heard of. General Patricia Morrison commanded Elena's immediate attention not just because of her two-star rank, but because of the intensity in her eyes that suggested this briefing involved matters of national importance. Major David Chen wore the subdued patches of Army Special Operations Command, while Commander Sarah Walsh represented Naval Intelligence Operations in the Pacific. Most unusually, Dr. Michael Torres appeared to be a civilian analyst, whose presence implied that this situation involved threats that extended beyond conventional military concerns. Specialist Vasquez, General Morrison began without preamble, your analytical work over the past 18 months has come to our attention through Colonel Webb's reports. We have a situation that requires exactly the kind of unconventional thinking you've demonstrated, and we need your assessment immediately. The general's tone suggested that Elena's opinion would carry significant weight in whatever decision was about to be made. The situation briefing revealed a crisis that challenged everything Elena thought she understood about modern warfare. A joint Navy SEAL and Delta Force team had been inserted into the Kamchatka Peninsula 3 weeks earlier to investigate reports of a new type of weapons facility being constructed in one of the most remote and heavily defended locations on Earth. The team had successfully infiltrated the target area and confirmed the existence of advanced weapons technology that posed a direct threat to American interests in the Pacific. However, the extraction operation had gone catastrophically wrong. Severe weather had prevented helicopter pickup, hostile forces had detected the team's presence and were conducting intensive search operations, and the original exfiltration route had been compromised by enemy reinforcements that made conventional escape impossible. 6 of America's most elite soldiers were trapped in hostile territory, with limited supplies, no communication capability, and enemy forces closing in on their position. Major Chen outlined the military's response options with professional detachment that couldn't entirely mask his frustration. We've considered every conventional extraction method. Helicopter assault would require air support that would escalate this into an international incident. Naval extraction would take too long given the team's current supply situation. Overland rescue missions would require resources we don't have positioned in the region. His assessment painted a picture of elite soldiers abandoned by the same technological superiority that had made their insertion possible. Commander Walsh's intelligence update made the situation even more complex. Satellite imagery shows that the enemy has deployed search teams with advanced surveillance equipment throughout the region. They're using systematic search patterns that will locate our people within 72 hours unless something changes the tactical situation. Her analysis suggested that conventional military thinking had exhausted its options for solving this crisis. Dr. Torres provided the context that explained why Elena had been summoned to this high-level briefing. Specialist Vasquez's mission analyses have consistently identified solutions that conventional planning overlooked. Her approach to problems involving extreme environments, extended timelines, and unconventional tactics has produced results that exceed anything we've seen from traditional special operations planning. His assessment implied that Elena's unofficial reputation had reached the highest levels of military planning. General Morrison addressed Elena directly with a question that carried enormous implications. Specialist Vasquez, we need you to review this situation and provide your assessment of options that we might have missed. These 6 soldiers represent years of training and experience that we cannot afford to lose, and they're carrying intelligence about enemy capabilities that could affect national security for decades. What approaches might we consider that conventional planning hasn't identified? Elena studied the briefing materials with the systematic thoroughness that had become her trademark. She examined satellite imagery of the Kamchatka Peninsula, reviewed weather forecasts for the region, analyzed the enemy's search patterns, and considered the capabilities and limitations of the trapped team. Her initial assessment confirmed that conventional extraction methods were indeed impossible given the current tactical situation, but her analysis also identified factors that the military planners had overlooked or dismissed as irrelevant. Elena's first observation challenged fundamental assumptions about the rescue timeline. The enemy's search pattern is systematic and thorough, but it's also predictable and resource-intensive. They're deploying significant personnel and equipment to maintain their current search tempo, which means they can't sustain this level of effort indefinitely without weakening their defensive positions around the weapons facility. Her analysis suggested that patience might be a more effective strategy than immediate action. Elena's second insight addressed the communications problem that was preventing coordination between the trapped team and potential rescue forces. Standard radio communications are being jammed, but the team carries emergency beacons that operate on different frequencies. These beacons aren't designed for voice communication, but they can transmit coded signals that could be used to coordinate movement without alerting enemy monitoring systems. Her technical knowledge revealed capabilities that tactical planners had overlooked. Elena's most significant contribution involved her understanding of environmental conditions that could be leveraged to change the tactical situation. Weather forecasts indicate a major storm system approaching the region within 48 hours. This storm will ground enemy aircraft, reduce visibility for ground search teams, and create opportunities for movement that don't exist under current conditions. However, it will also create extreme survival challenges for our people unless they're properly prepared and positioned. Elena's analysis led to a recommendation that was characteristically patient and methodical, but also bold in its departure from conventional thinking. Instead of attempting immediate extraction under impossible conditions, she proposed using the approaching storm as cover for a complex operation that would require the trapped team to move to a new location where extraction would be possible after the weather cleared. The plan required precise timing, sophisticated coordination, and survival skills that would test even elite soldiers, but it offered realistic chances of success where conventional approaches had none. General Morrison's response to Elena's proposal was immediate and decisive. Your plan requires capabilities that extend beyond traditional military operations. We need someone who understands Arctic survival, who can coordinate complex operations under extreme conditions, and who can adapt tactics in real time as situations develop. We need you to lead this operation personally. The general's statement transformed Elena from analytical advisor to operational commander in a single sentence. Elena's transition from logistics specialist to mission leader involved compressed training that challenged every assumption about her capabilities and limitations. She received intensive briefings on special operations procedures, communications protocols, and extraction techniques that were far removed from her official military specialization. She worked with equipment that represented the most advanced technology available to American forces, learning to operate systems that could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. The most significant aspect of Elena's preparation was psychological, rather than technical. For the first time in her military career, she was being trusted with responsibility that matched her demonstrated capabilities rather than her official rank or training background. Officers who outranked her by several levels were asking for her recommendations and implementing her suggestions without question. The transformation was as dramatic as it was overdue. Elena's mission planning reflected her characteristic attention to detail and systematic approach to complex problems. She identified multiple contingency plans for each phase of the operation, established communication protocols that could function under various conditions, and coordinated resources from multiple organizations to support an operation that no single unit could accomplish alone. Her plans were comprehensive enough to address predictable challenges, while remaining flexible enough to adapt to unexpected developments. The operation itself began with Elena's insertion into the Kamchatka Peninsula using methods that reflected her unconventional approach to military challenges. Instead of dramatic helicopter deployment or submarine infiltration, she arrived as part of a scientific research team that had legitimate reasons for being in the region. Her cover identity provided perfect camouflage for reconnaissance activities, while allowing her to establish communication with the trapped team using seemingly innocent scientific equipment that enemy forces had no reason to monitor or restrict. Elena's first contact with the SEAL team came through a series of coded transmissions that used frequency patterns disguised as geological survey data. The messages revealed that the 6 soldiers were in better condition than intelligence estimates had suggested, but they were running low on cold weather supplies and had been forced to abandon their primary shelter when enemy search teams came too close. Team leader Master Chief Petty Officer James Rodriguez reported their position using coordinates that Elena cross-referenced with her detailed topographical analysis of the region. The intelligence that Elena gathered during her first week in Kamchatka exceeded anything that satellite surveillance had been able to provide. Moving freely through the region as part of her scientific cover, she observed enemy patrol patterns, identified gaps in their surveillance coverage, and located terrain features that could provide concealment for extraction operations. Most importantly, she discovered that the weapons facility was protected by security measures that extended far beyond the obvious military presence, including electronic monitoring systems that could detect conventional rescue attempts from much greater distances than American planners had realized. Elena's analysis of the tactical situation confirmed her original assessment that patience would be more effective than immediate action. The enemy's intensive search operations were indeed unsustainable, and their commanders were already beginning to redeploy resources to other priorities as the search entered its 4th week without results. However, the approaching storm system was larger and more severe than initial weather forecasts had predicted, creating both opportunities and dangers that required significant modifications to her original extraction plan. The storm that struck the Kamchatka Peninsula was unlike anything Elena had experienced even during her years in Alaska. Winds exceeded 80 miles per hour, temperatures dropped to -50 degrees Fahrenheit, and visibility was reduced to less than 10 feet in blowing snow that could disorient even experienced Arctic travelers. The conditions were severe enough to ground all aircraft in the region and force enemy ground patrols to seek shelter, but they also created survival challenges that tested the limits of human endurance. Elena used the storm's cover to make contact with the trapped SEAL team at a rendezvous point she had identified through careful analysis of terrain features and weather patterns. The meeting took place in a natural cave formation that provided shelter from the wind while remaining invisible to any surveillance systems that might still be operating in the extreme conditions. Elena's arrival carrying additional cold weather supplies and communication equipment represented the first good news the team had received since their extraction had failed. Master Chief Rodriguez's initial assessment of Elena was skeptical, despite his professional gratitude for her assistance. "Ma'am, we appreciate the supplies and the communication link, but extracting 6 operators through this terrain in these conditions is going to require resources and expertise that weren't part of our original mission planning. How exactly do you propose to get us out of here without helicopters or heavy support? His question reflected the reasonable assumption that Elena's logistics background hadn't prepared her for leading special operations in hostile territory. Elena's response demonstrated how completely her role had evolved beyond conventional military specializations. She outlined a multi-phase extraction plan that utilized her detailed knowledge of regional geography, weather patterns, and enemy capabilities to create opportunities that hadn't existed when conventional planners had exhausted their options. Her plan required the team to move through terrain that maps showed as impassable, but Elena's analysis revealed routes that were difficult but navigable for personnel with appropriate equipment and techniques. The first phase of Elena's extraction plan involved relocating the team to a position that offered better defensive capabilities while moving them closer to potential extraction points. This required traveling 15 miles through mountainous terrain during storm conditions that would challenge even the most experienced Arctic travelers. Elena's route planning took advantage of natural windbreaks and terrain features that provided some protection from the worst weather, but the movements still required skills and endurance that tested everyone involved. Elena's leadership during the movement phase surprised the SEAL operators who had initially questioned her capabilities. Her navigation skills were flawless, despite conditions that made conventional GPS systems unreliable. Her understanding of cold weather survival kept the team functional when temperatures would have incapacitated less prepared personnel, and her tactical awareness identified and avoided enemy positions that satellite intelligence had missed. Most importantly, her calm confidence under extreme conditions provided psychological stability that helped the team maintain morale during one of the most challenging operations any of them had experienced. The team's new position provided access to communication systems that Elena had pre-positioned using her scientific cover activities. From this location, she was able to coordinate with extraction forces that were standing by outside the enemy's surveillance perimeter, waiting for weather conditions to improve enough to allow helicopter operations. However, Elena's analysis indicated that the storm would be followed by a period of clear weather that would restore full enemy surveillance capabilities, creating a narrow window when extraction would be possible but not guaranteed. Elena's second phase involved what she called aggressive misdirection that would draw enemy attention away from the actual extraction zone, while creating confusion about American capabilities and intentions in the region. This required coordinating activities involving multiple units operating from different locations, using deception techniques that convinced enemy commanders that rescue attempts were being made at locations far from where the actual extraction would occur. Elena's plan was sophisticated enough to fool professional intelligence analysts while simple enough to execute reliably under field conditions. The deception operation succeeded beyond Elena's expectations. Enemy forces responded to her coordinated distractions by redeploying significant resources to investigate false rescue attempts at 3 different locations around the peninsula. Their reaction provided exactly the gap in surveillance coverage that Elena needed to move the SEAL team to the final extraction point, a location she had identified through analysis that combined topographical data, weather forecasting, and tactical assessment of enemy capabilities and limitations. Elena's final extraction plan required helicopter pilots to perform operations at the edge of their aircraft's capabilities in weather conditions that military flight manuals classified as prohibitive for tactical operations. The plan succeeded because Elena's coordination allowed the pilots to approach the extraction zone with perfect intelligence about wind patterns, visibility conditions, and enemy positions that could threaten the aircraft during pickup operations. Her timing was precise enough that the helicopters arrived during a brief break in storm activity that provided just enough visibility and reduced wind for safe operations. The actual extraction took less than 3 minutes, but it represented the culmination of planning and execution that had required capabilities Elena hadn't known she possessed when the operation began. She had successfully coordinated complex military operations involving multiple units across several hundred miles of hostile territory, had outmaneuvered professional enemy forces using tactics they hadn't anticipated, and had demonstrated leadership abilities that exceeded anything her official training or previous experience had suggested she could achieve. The intelligence that the SEAL team had gathered about enemy weapons capabilities proved as valuable as Elena's successful extraction operation. Their reconnaissance had revealed technology that represented a significant threat to American interests throughout the Pacific region, information that influenced military planning and diplomatic initiatives for months afterward. The combination of successful intelligence gathering and personnel recovery made Elena's operation a strategic success that justified the risks and resources invested in its execution. Elena's debriefing at Fort Richardson revealed the full scope of what she had accomplished during her time in Kamchatka. General Morrison's assessment was unequivocal. Specialist Vasquez demonstrated operational capabilities that exceed those of personnel with decades of special operations experience. Her planning was comprehensive, her execution was flawless, and her leadership under extreme conditions was exemplary. The evaluation marked a complete reversal of every assessment Elena had received during her military career. The reaction from the rescued SEAL team provided even more significant validation of Elena's capabilities. Master Chief Rodriguez's report stated, "Specialist Vasquez saved our lives through superior planning, exceptional leadership, and tactical skills that surpassed anything we expected from someone outside the special operations community. Her methods were unconventional, but consistently effective, and her decision-making under pressure was outstanding." Coming from elite operators whose standards were notoriously high, such praise represented recognition that Elena had earned through demonstrated competence rather than institutional favor. Dr. Torres' analysis of Elena's operation focused on the innovative aspects of her approach that distinguished her methods from conventional special operations planning. Specialist Vasquez consistently identified solutions that traditional thinking overlooked because she approached problems from different perspectives than standard military training provides. Her success wasn't due to superior resources or technology, but to superior analysis and creative application of available capabilities. His assessment suggested that Elena's unconventional background had been an advantage rather than a limitation. Elena's successful operation had implications that extended far beyond the immediate rescue mission. Her methods demonstrated that certain types of military challenges could be addressed more effectively through patient analysis and methodical planning than through conventional approaches that emphasized speed and overwhelming force. Her success validated approaches to military operations that training institutions had consistently undervalued, suggesting that the military's understanding of effective tactics might need significant revision. The personal impact of the operation on Elena was equally significant. For the first time in her military career, she had been given responsibility that matched her capabilities and had succeeded in ways that exceeded everyone's expectations, including her own. She had discovered that her patient, analytical approach to problems wasn't a weakness to be overcome, but a strength that could achieve results impossible through conventional thinking. Most importantly, she had proven to herself that she belonged in the military and could contribute meaningfully to operations that mattered. Elena's transformation from dismissed logistics specialist to successful special operations leader represented a complete reversal of institutional assessments that had consistently underestimated her potential. The operation demonstrated that military effectiveness couldn't be measured solely through traditional metrics like physical fitness scores or standardized tactical exercises. Elena's success proved that different approaches to military challenges could be equally valid and sometimes superior to conventional methods, especially when dealing with complex situations that required unconventional solutions. The intelligence community's interest in Elena's capabilities led to opportunities that would have been impossible to imagine when she was struggling through basic training. Organizations that specialized in operations requiring extended patience, environmental expertise, and unconventional tactical thinking began requesting her involvement in missions that conventional special operations units found challenging. Elena had discovered a career path that utilized her natural strengths rather than focusing on areas where she couldn't compete with personnel whose backgrounds were more typical. Elena's success in Kamchatka marked the beginning of her evolution, from overlooked support personnel to recognized specialist in operations that required exactly the capabilities she had always possessed, but that military training had never properly valued. She had found her place within the military structure, a role that allowed her to contribute her unique skills to missions that couldn't be accomplished through conventional approaches. The woman they had called Turtle was about to become someone that enemies would learn to fear. The foundation had been laid for Elena to transition from successful individual operator to someone whose methods would influence how the military approached certain types of challenges. Her success had proven that patient, methodical planning could achieve results that speed and aggression couldn't match, and that personnel whose backgrounds didn't fit conventional patterns might possess exactly the capabilities needed for unconventional missions. Elena's story was about to become a case study in the value of recognizing and developing talent that didn't conform to institutional expectations. As Elena prepared for her next assignment, she reflected on the journey that had brought her from the edge of military discharge to recognition as someone whose capabilities were valued at the highest levels of command. She had learned that success in the military, like success in life, wasn't always about fitting into predetermined patterns, but sometimes about creating new patterns that better address the challenges being faced. Her patient persistence had been vindicated in ways she had never dared to hope, and her future in the military now offered opportunities that would have seemed impossible just months earlier. The stage was set for Elena to transition from individual success to broader influence on military doctrine and training. Her methods had proven their effectiveness in real-world operations, her leadership had earned respect from personnel whose opinions carried significant weight, and her analytical capabilities had demonstrated value that extended beyond specific missions to broader strategic planning. Elena was about to discover that her greatest contribution to the military might not be individual operations, but the changes her success would inspire in how the institution identified, developed, and utilized unconventional talent. The revolution. The secure conference room at the Pentagon buzzed with an energy that Elena had never experienced during her years of military service. She found herself seated at a polished oak table, surrounded by general officers, intelligence officials, and policymakers whose decisions shaped American military operations around the world. 6 months after her successful extraction operation in Kamchatka, Elena's methods had become the subject of intense institutional examination that would ultimately transform how the military approached certain types of missions. Secretary of Defense Patricia Morrison presided over the gathering with the authority of someone whose recommendations would directly influence military policy for decades to come. Her opening statement established the stakes involved in the discussions that would follow. The success of unconventional operations has consistently exceeded projections when personnel like Specialist Vasquez have been involved in planning and execution. We need to understand whether her methods can be systematically applied to improve our overall operational effectiveness. General Harrison, who commanded Special Operations Forces worldwide, presented data that revealed the scope of Elena's impact on military operations since her Kamchatka success. Specialist Vasquez has been consulted on 47 operations across 3 theaters of operation in the past 6 months. Mission success rates for operations incorporating her analytical methods have exceeded traditional approaches by 38%, while casualty rates have decreased by 42%. His statistics demonstrated tangible benefits that extended far beyond individual mission success. The transformation in how military leadership viewed Elena's capabilities was evident in every aspect of the briefing. Officers who had never met her referenced her assessments when discussing operational planning, intelligence officials incorporated her analytical frameworks into their standard procedures, and training commands were experimenting with modified approaches that reflected her emphasis on environmental awareness and patient tactical thinking. Elena had become what military theorists called a paradigm shift catalyst, someone whose individual success challenged fundamental assumptions about institutional effectiveness. Admiral Chen, representing Pacific Fleet operations, provided specific examples of how Elena's methods had influenced naval intelligence gathering in disputed waters throughout the South China Sea. Operations planned using Specialist Vasquez's analytical framework have gathered intelligence that conventional approaches consistently missed. Her emphasis on extended observation periods and environmental factor analysis has revealed patterns of enemy activity that satellite surveillance never detected. Her influence had extended to operations she had never directly participated in, demonstrating the broader applicability of her approaches. Colonel Webb's presentation focused on the training implications of Elena's success. Traditional military training emphasizes speed, aggression, and overwhelming force as primary tactical virtues. Specialist Vasquez's methods demonstrate that patience, analysis, and environmental adaptation can achieve superior results in specific operational contexts. The question we face is whether our training program should be modified to develop these capabilities more systematically. His analysis suggested that Elena's individual success might indicate broader institutional shortcomings. Dr. Torres, representing the Defense Intelligence Agency, addressed the intelligence community's assessment of Elena's analytical capabilities. Specialist Vasquez's approach to operational planning incorporates factors that traditional intelligence analysis often overlooks or undervalues. Her success rate in predicting enemy responses, environmental complications, and logistical requirements exceeds anything we've documented from personnel with conventional training backgrounds. His evaluation suggested that Elena's methods represented genuine innovation rather than lucky improvisation. Elena's response to the institutional attention her success had generated was characteristically thoughtful and systematic. My methods aren't revolutionary, they're just different applications of basic military principles adapted to specific operational requirements. The key insight is recognizing when patient analysis will produce better results than rapid decision-making, and when environmental factors are more important than traditional tactical considerations. Her explanation emphasized practical application rather than theoretical innovation. The briefing revealed that Elena's influence had already begun reshaping military training at several institutions. The Army's Ranger School had incorporated extended observation exercises that emphasized patience and environmental awareness. The Navy's SEAL training program was experimenting with modified approaches to reconnaissance operations that reflected Elena's emphasis on systematic analysis rather than rapid action. Even conventional infantry training was being modified to include components that developed the analytical skills Elena had demonstrated in her operations. Elena's promotion to Master Sergeant had been accompanied by a new military occupational specialty that didn't exist in traditional classifications: Environmental Operations Specialist. The designation recognized that her capabilities couldn't be adequately described using conventional military categories, and that her value to the institution required acknowledging skills that traditional training programs didn't develop. Elena had become a specialist in capabilities that the military was still learning to understand and utilize. The most significant aspect of Elena's institutional recognition was the establishment of a new training program designed to identify and develop personnel whose capabilities resembled hers. The Environmental Operations Training course would focus on developing analytical skills, environmental awareness, and patient tactical thinking in soldiers whose backgrounds suggested they might possess unconventional capabilities that traditional training overlooked. Elena would serve as the program's primary instructor and curriculum developer. Elena's first class of environmental operations students represented a carefully selected group of personnel whose previous evaluations had identified them as possessing analytical capabilities that exceeded their performance on conventional military assessments. Like Elena, many had been rated as adequate but uninspiring by traditional standards, despite demonstrating competencies that suggested they might excel in roles that valued their particular combinations of skills and experience. Sergeant Maria Santos had grown up on a ranch in Montana, where she learned tracking and survival skills that translated poorly to conventional military training, but proved invaluable during reconnaissance operations. Staff Sergeant David Kim possessed technical analysis capabilities that exceeded most intelligence specialists, but his quiet personality had prevented him from receiving recognition in units that valued more aggressive leadership styles. Corporal Jennifer Walsh had demonstrated exceptional situational awareness during combat operations, but her careful decision-making approach had been criticized as hesitant by commanders who preferred rapid tactical responses. Elena's approach to training these unconventional soldiers reflected her understanding that their capabilities needed to be developed rather than corrected. Instead of trying to make them faster or more aggressive, she focused on helping them understand when their natural approaches would be most effective and how to apply their skills to specific operational requirements. Her training emphasized analysis, adaptation, and patience as tactical virtues, rather than weaknesses to be overcome. The first field exercise conducted by Elena's environmental operations students took place in the Alaskan wilderness, where conditions would test their ability to apply unconventional methods to realistic challenges. The exercise scenario involved locating and recovering simulated intelligence from a heavily defended position, while avoiding detection by opposing forces equipped with advanced surveillance equipment. Traditional military approaches to this challenge would emphasize speed and overwhelming force, but Elena's training had prepared her students for different solutions. Sergeant Santos's team approached the challenge using techniques that reflected her ranching background rather than conventional military training. She spent 2 days studying the opposition's patrol patterns and surveillance coverage, identifying gaps in their security that weren't obvious from initial reconnaissance. Her team's approach to the target was methodical and patient, taking advantage of natural terrain features and weather conditions to avoid detection, while gradually working closer to their objective. Staff Sergeant Kim's technical analysis of the opposing force's electronic surveillance systems revealed vulnerabilities that conventional military planning typically missed. His understanding of how equipment performed under specific environmental conditions allowed his team to identify times and locations where surveillance coverage would be degraded, creating opportunities for infiltration that wouldn't exist under normal operational conditions. His approach emphasized technical knowledge rather than tactical aggression. Corporal Walsh's team demonstrated the value of exceptional situational awareness in complex operational environments. Her ability to process multiple sources of information simultaneously allowed her to coordinate team movements that avoided detection while positioning them for successful mission completion. Her leadership style emphasized coordination and adaptation rather than command and control, producing results that exceeded what traditional leadership approaches typically achieved. The exercise results validated Elena's training methods and demonstrated that unconventional approaches could consistently produce superior outcomes when applied appropriately. All three teams completed their objectives without detection, gathered more comprehensive intelligence than the exercise parameters required, and demonstrated tactical flexibility that exceeded expectations. Their success provided concrete evidence that Elena's methods could be systematically taught and applied by personnel with appropriate backgrounds and training. General Morrison's assessment of the Environmental Operations Training course was unequivocal. This program has identified capabilities that our traditional training systems consistently overlook, and has demonstrated methods for developing these capabilities systematically. The operational results justify expanding this approach and integrating it into our broader training framework. Her endorsement represented institutional recognition that Elena's individual success indicated broader possibilities for military effectiveness. The expansion of Elena's training program led to the establishment of environmental operations units within each major command, specialized organizations that could be deployed when missions required capabilities that conventional forces couldn't provide effectively. These units became the military's go-to resource for operations involving extended reconnaissance, environmental challenges, and situations where patient analysis was more valuable than rapid response. Elena's influence had created an entirely new category of military capability. Elena's personal evolution during this period was as significant as her institutional impact. She had transitioned from dismissed support personnel to recognized expert whose methods influenced military operations worldwide. Her quiet confidence had been replaced by authoritative competence that earned respect from personnel at every level of the military hierarchy. Most importantly, she had discovered that her greatest contribution wasn't individual operational success, but institutional change that would benefit countless future operations. The intelligence community's adoption of Elena's analytical methods produced improvements in operational effectiveness that exceeded anyone's expectations. Her emphasis on environmental factors, extended observation periods, and systematic analysis had revealed intelligence-gathering opportunities that conventional approaches consistently missed. Operations incorporating her methods were producing intelligence that influenced strategic planning at the highest levels of government, demonstrating that her individual capabilities had broader implications for national security. Elena's influence on military doctrine extended beyond specialized operations to conventional training programs that were incorporating modified versions of her analytical methods. Infantry units were learning to value environmental awareness alongside traditional tactical skills. Intelligence personnel were being trained in systematic observation techniques that Elena had developed, and leadership development programs were emphasizing the decision-making approaches that had made Elena's operations successful. The transformation in how the military viewed unconventional talent was perhaps Elena's most significant achievement. Her success had demonstrated that personnel whose capabilities didn't fit traditional patterns might possess exactly the skills needed for certain types of missions, and that identifying and developing such personnel could produce significant improvements in operational effectiveness. Elena had proven that different didn't mean inferior, and that institutional flexibility could unlock capabilities that rigid adherence to conventional standards would never discover. Elena's final assignment represented the ultimate recognition of her transformation from overlooked soldier to institutional influencer. She was promoted to sergeant major and assigned to the Pentagon as senior advisor for unconventional operations, a position created specifically to utilize her unique combination of operational experience and analytical capabilities. Her responsibilities included reviewing mission plans for operations worldwide, advising commanders on environmental factors that could affect operational success, and continuing to develop training programs that identified and developed unconventional military talent. The intercepted enemy communications that had identified Elena as the Ghost represented the ultimate validation of her transformation. Enemy forces had learned to fear her methods because they couldn't predict or counter approaches that didn't follow conventional military patterns. Her reputation among opponents demonstrated that her unconventional capabilities translated into operational advantages that conventional training couldn't match, proving that her patient, analytical approach had become a genuine strategic asset. Elena's story had become a case study taught at military academies and training institutions worldwide, demonstrating how institutional flexibility and individual persistence could combine to produce extraordinary results. Her journey from dismissed recruit to respected specialist proved that military effectiveness couldn't be measured solely through traditional metrics, and that recognizing unconventional talent could provide capabilities that conventional approaches would never develop. The woman they had called Turtle had become someone whose methods influenced military operations on a global scale, whose training programs developed capabilities that enhanced national security, and whose success demonstrated that sometimes the most valuable soldiers are those who don't fit conventional molds. Elena's revolution wasn't just personal, but institutional, changing how the military identified, developed, and utilized talent that previous systems had consistently overlooked and undervalued. The encrypted message that arrived at Elena's Pentagon office on a rain-soaked Tuesday morning in October carried the kind of urgency that made seasoned military professionals pause everything they were doing. The communication came directly from Admiral Thompson, commander of Pacific Fleet Operations, with a classification level that required Elena to access it from a secure terminal in a room designed to prevent any form of electronic surveillance. The crisis unfolding in the South China Sea represented everything that conventional military planning struggled to address effectively. A joint special operations team comprising Navy SEALs, Army Rangers, and Marine Force reconnaissance personnel had been conducting deep reconnaissance of suspected weapons installations on a chain of disputed islands. The mission had been progressing successfully for 2 weeks, when catastrophic equipment failure and coordinated enemy response had transformed routine intelligence gathering into a desperate survival situation. 8 of America's most elite operators were now trapped on Scarborough Shoal, a strategically critical piece of real estate that multiple nations claimed, but that had become increasingly dominated by Chinese military presence over the past year. The team's extraction had been scheduled for the previous evening, but a combination of severe weather, equipment malfunctions, and unexpected enemy reinforcements had made conventional rescue impossible. Worse, intercepted communications indicated that enemy forces knew American personnel were present and were conducting systematic searches that would locate the team within hours. Admiral Thompson's briefing revealed the complexity of constraints that made this crisis particularly challenging for conventional military response. Any large-scale rescue operation would require air and naval assets that would be detected long before they could reach the target area, potentially escalating the situation into direct military confrontation between major powers. Diplomatic considerations prevented overt military action that could be interpreted as aggressive expansion of American presence in disputed waters. Most critically, the window for any rescue attempt was closing rapidly as weather conditions worsened and enemy search operations intensified. The intelligence that the trapped team had gathered was significant enough to justify extraordinary risks for their recovery. Their reconnaissance had confirmed the existence of advanced missile systems capable of threatening American naval operations throughout the Pacific, installations that represented a fundamental shift in regional military balance. The loss of this intelligence, combined with the potential capture of elite American personnel, would have strategic implications that extended far beyond the immediate tactical situation. Elena's involvement in the crisis came at Admiral Thompson's specific request, based on her established reputation for solving problems that defeated conventional military planning. Her success in similar situations had earned her recognition as someone who could identify solutions that traditional thinking overlooked, particularly when operations required patience, environmental expertise, and unconventional approaches to tactical challenges. The Admiral's message was direct. Need your assessment immediately. Conventional options exhausted. Situation deteriorating rapidly. Elena's initial analysis of the situation confirmed that standard military responses were indeed impossible given the political and tactical constraints involved. However, her systematic examination of available intelligence revealed opportunities that rescue planners had dismissed as impractical or irrelevant. Her approach to the problem reflected the methodical thinking that had consistently produced results when conventional planning failed, focusing on factors that others considered secondary to primary tactical concerns. Elena's first insight involved the weather conditions that were complicating rescue efforts. While the approaching typhoon made helicopter operations impossible and naval approaches extremely dangerous, the same weather system created opportunities for concealment and movement that wouldn't exist under normal conditions. The storm's intensity would ground enemy aircraft, reduce the effectiveness of electronic surveillance systems, and force opposing ground personnel to seek shelter, creating gaps in their search coverage that could be exploited by properly prepared operators. Elena's second critical observation addressed the assumption that rescue required external extraction forces. Her analysis of the team's reported position and capabilities suggested that they might be able to reach extraction points that were currently inaccessible to conventional rescue assets. The key was identifying routes and methods that took advantage of environmental conditions rather than fighting against them, using the storm's chaos as concealment rather than viewing it purely as an obstacle to overcome. Elena's most innovative contribution involved recognizing that the mission's intelligence objectives hadn't been completed, despite the successful reconnaissance that had triggered the current crisis. The team's hasty withdrawal had prevented them from gathering critical technical specifications about the missile installation's command and control systems, information that would be essential for developing countermeasures against the new threat. Elena's analysis suggested that completing the original mission might actually provide the best opportunity for successful extraction. Admiral Thompson's reaction to Elena's preliminary assessment was skeptical but interested. "You're suggesting that instead of immediate extraction, we should have the team conduct additional reconnaissance while enemy forces are actively hunting them?" This question reflected the reasonable assumption that Elena's proposal dramatically increased, rather than reduced the risks involved. Her response demonstrated the sophisticated tactical thinking that had made her method successful in previous operations. Elena's detailed plan addressed each of Admiral Thompson's concerns with systematic precision. The Typhoon's passage would create a 36-hour window when enemy forces would be unable to maintain intensive search operations, providing time for the team to relocate to positions that offered better concealment while moving closer to the missile installations that were their original targets. The same weather conditions that prevented conventional extraction would also degrade enemy surveillance capabilities, creating opportunities for intelligence gathering that wouldn't exist under normal operational conditions. Elena's proposed extraction method reflected her characteristic emphasis on patience and environmental adaptation over speed and technological solutions. Instead of dramatic helicopter rescue or naval extraction under fire, she recommended a gradual withdrawal that would take advantage of post-storm conditions to move the team to a location where pickup could be accomplished without alerting enemy forces or creating international incidents. The plan required precise timing and sophisticated coordination, but it offered realistic chances of success where conventional approaches had none. The approval process for Elena's operation involved consultations at the highest levels of military and civilian leadership. The National Security Council reviewed her plan during an emergency session that included the President, Secretary of Defense, and senior military commanders from all services. Elena found herself briefing officials whose decisions shaped American foreign policy, explaining tactical details to political leaders who needed to understand both military and diplomatic implications of her proposed operation. Elena's presentation to national leadership demonstrated her evolution from technical specialist to strategic thinker, whose recommendations carried implications far beyond immediate tactical concerns. She addressed not only the military aspects of her plan, but also the political considerations that made conventional military response impossible, the intelligence value of completing the original mission objectives, and the long-term strategic benefits of demonstrating American capabilities without escalating regional tensions through overt military confrontation. The President's approval of Elena's operation came with resources and authority that reflected the mission's strategic importance. She was given operational command of assets across multiple services, including specialized communications equipment, weather reconnaissance capabilities, and extraction forces positioned throughout the Pacific. Most significantly, she was authorized to coordinate directly with intelligence agencies and diplomatic personnel, whose cooperation would be essential for managing the political aspects of her operation. Elena's deployment to the operational area began with her insertion onto a research vessel that provided perfect cover for coordinating rescue operations without alerting enemy forces to American military presence in disputed waters. The ship's scientific mission gave her legitimate reasons for being in the region, while providing access to communication systems and surveillance capabilities that would be essential for directing the complex operation she had planned. The first phase of Elena's operation involved re-establishing communication with the trapped Special Operations Team using methods that avoided detection by enemy monitoring systems. Her technical knowledge allowed her to utilize the research vessel's oceanographic equipment to create communication links that appeared to be routine scientific data collection, but actually carried encoded messages coordinating tactical movements and intelligence-gathering priorities. The team's response confirmed that they were in better condition than initial reports had suggested, but were running low on supplies and facing increasing pressure from enemy search operations. Elena's coordination of the team's movement during the typhoon required real-time adaptation to conditions that changed by the hour. The storm's intensity created both opportunities and dangers that hadn't been predictable during initial planning, forcing Elena to modify her timeline and adjust extraction points based on weather patterns, enemy responses, and the team's actual capabilities under extreme conditions. Her ability to maintain operational control despite communication difficulties and constantly changing circumstances demonstrated the leadership skills that her unconventional career path had developed. The intelligence-gathering phase of Elena's operation produced results that exceeded the mission's original objectives. Taking advantage of the chaos created by typhoon damage to enemy installations, the Special Operations Team was able to access facilities that would normally have been impossible to approach, gathering technical specifications and photographic evidence of weapons systems that represented genuine threats to American interests throughout the Pacific region. The intelligence they collected would influence military planning and diplomatic initiatives for years to come. Elena's extraction of the team required coordination with naval assets that operated at the edge of their capabilities in post-storm conditions that remained dangerous despite the typhoon's passage. Her timing had to account for enemy damage assessment activities, weather windows that would permit helicopter operations, and diplomatic considerations that prevented overt military presence in waters claimed by multiple nations. The successful pickup was accomplished with such precision that enemy forces remained unaware that American personnel had ever been present in the area. The debriefing that followed Elena's successful operation revealed the full scope of what she had accomplished during 72 hours of continuous coordination under extreme conditions. She had successfully extracted 8 elite operators from impossible circumstances, had completed intelligence-gathering objectives that provided strategic advantages throughout the Pacific region, and had demonstrated American capabilities without creating the international incidents that conventional military response would have triggered. Her success represented a level of operational achievement that exceeded anything similar missions had accomplished. Admiral Thompson's assessment of Elena's performance established her reputation as someone whose capabilities transcended conventional military specializations. Master Sergeant Vasquez demonstrated operational command abilities that rival those of officers with decades of experience leading complex special operations. Her planning was comprehensive, her execution was flawless, and her ability to adapt to changing conditions while maintaining mission focus was extraordinary. His evaluation reflected recognition that Elena had evolved far beyond her original role as analytical specialist. The intelligence community's analysis of the mission's results focused on the innovative aspects of Elena's approach that had made success possible when conventional methods had failed. Her integration of environmental factors, patient tactical development, and sophisticated coordination had created opportunities that traditional military planning consistently missed. Most importantly, her methods had achieved strategic objectives without the political complications that would have accompanied conventional military operations in such sensitive circumstances. Elena's success in the South China Sea operation earned her recognition that extended far beyond military circles. Intelligence agencies began requesting her involvement in operations that required unconventional approaches to complex challenges. Diplomatic personnel sought her advice on situations where military and political considerations intersected, and policymakers recognized her as someone whose tactical innovations had strategic implications that influenced national security decision-making at the highest levels. The most significant recognition of Elena's transformation came through the establishment of a new organizational structure designed to utilize her unique combination of operational and analytical capabilities. The Joint Unconventional Operations Command was created specifically to provide institutional support for missions that required capabilities like Elena's, with authority to coordinate resources across all military services and intelligence agencies. Elena was appointed as the command's first operational director, a position that recognized her evolution from overlooked support personnel to strategic asset. Elena's new responsibilities involved reviewing potential operations worldwide, identifying missions where unconventional approaches might produce superior results, and developing specialized personnel whose capabilities could address challenges that conventional military training didn't prepare soldiers to handle. Her influence had expanded from individual operational success to institutional innovation that would affect military effectiveness for generations to come, proving that sometimes the most valuable contributions come from those whose methods challenge rather than conform to established practices. The intercepted enemy communications that began referring to Elena as the Ghost represented the ultimate validation of her transformation from dismissed recruit to feared opponent. Enemy intelligence services had identified her as a significant threat, specifically because her methods were unpredictable using conventional military analysis, making it impossible for opposing forces to develop effective countermeasures against operations she planned or led. Her reputation among adversaries demonstrated that unconventional capabilities could provide genuine strategic advantages that traditional military approaches couldn't match. Elena's evolution from support personnel to operational commander represented more than individual career success. It demonstrated the military's capacity for recognizing and developing talent that didn't fit conventional patterns, but could provide capabilities that standard training programs never produced. Her story had become proof that institutional flexibility and individual persistence could combine to create extraordinary results that benefited not just individual careers but national security interests that extended far beyond any single operation or assignment. The war room at the Pentagon had never hosted a briefing quite like the one that took place on a crisp December morning, exactly 5 years after Elena Vasquez had first stepped off that transport bus at Camp Davidson. The assembled officials represented every major intelligence agency, military command, and policy-making organization in the American government, all gathered to discuss a phenomenon that had fundamentally altered how the United States conducted its most sensitive operations worldwide. Defense Secretary Robert Harrison opened the session with statistics that seemed almost impossible to believe. Operations incorporating methodologies developed by Sergeant Major Vasquez have achieved a 93% success rate over the past 3 years, compared to 67% for conventional approaches. More significantly, these operations have been accomplished with zero casualties and minimal diplomatic complications, even in the most sensitive geopolitical environments. The numbers represented a revolution in military effectiveness that extended far beyond individual operational success. General Patricia Chen, now chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, provided context that explained why Elena's influence had grown to encompass strategic planning at the highest levels of government. What began as tactical innovations for specific types of missions has evolved into a comprehensive approach to conflict resolution that consistently achieves American objectives without the escalation risks associated with traditional military responses. Her assessment reflected institutional recognition that Elena's methods had strategic rather than merely tactical implications. The transformation in how America's adversaries viewed Elena's capabilities was documented through intelligence intercepts that painted a picture of genuine concern among enemy military planners. Foreign intelligence services had begun dedicating significant resources to understanding and countering what they termed phantom operations that achieved results impossible through conventional analysis. Chinese military planners referred to her as Gi Ying, the shadow spirit who struck without warning and vanished without trace. Russian intelligence reports described operations bearing her signature as impossible to predict using standard tactical models. Elena's promotion to brigadier general had been accompanied by the creation of an entirely new military specialty focused on developing and deploying unconventional operational capabilities. The Special Methods Division now trained personnel from all military services in approaches that emphasized environmental adaptation, extended analysis periods, and tactical patience over traditional metrics of military effectiveness. Elena's methods had become institutionalized at a level that ensured their continuation long after her individual career ended. The most remarkable aspect of Elena's institutional influence was how completely it had reversed traditional military priorities in certain operational contexts. Training programs that had once emphasized speed and aggression now included extensive modules on patient observation and environmental integration. Selection criteria for special operations personnel had been modified to identify candidates whose backgrounds included experiences that developed analytical thinking and adaptive problem-solving capabilities. Elena's success had proven that different types of intelligence and preparation could produce superior results in specific situations. Admiral David Torres, commanding Pacific Fleet operations, described how Elena's analytical frameworks had influenced naval strategy throughout the most contested waters on Earth. Our understanding of regional dynamics, environmental factors, and adversary capabilities has been fundamentally enhanced through applications of analytical methods that originated with General Vasquez's operational approaches. We're seeing patterns and opportunities that conventional intelligence analysis consistently missed. His assessment demonstrated that Elena's influence extended throughout the military hierarchy. The establishment of the Vasquez Institute for Advanced Strategic Studies represented the ultimate recognition of Elena's transformation from dismissed recruit to institutional innovator. Located at the Army War College, the institute focused on developing strategic thinking capabilities that combine traditional military analysis with environmental awareness, cultural understanding, and patient tactical development. Elena's methods were being taught to future generals, admirals, and intelligence officials whose careers would span decades of American military operations. Elena's current assignment as Senior Strategic Advisor to the National Security Council placed her at the center of policy discussions that shaped American responses to global challenges. Her office in the West Wing of the White House represented a journey that seemed impossible when she was struggling through basic training, but her presence in national security discussions reflected genuine recognition of capabilities that transcended conventional military classifications. She had become someone whose recommendations influenced decisions made by the president and senior cabinet officials. The operational successes that had established Elena's reputation continued to accumulate with remarkable consistency. Her recent coordination of a hostage rescue operation in Somalia had freed American aid workers without alerting terrorist groups to the presence of rescue forces. Her analysis of Iranian naval activities in the Persian Gulf had enabled preemptive diplomatic initiatives that prevented military confrontations. Her recommendations for addressing North Korean provocations had produced policy responses that achieved deterrence without escalation, demonstrating that patient strategic thinking could accomplish objectives that military pressure alone couldn't achieve. Elena's influence on international military cooperation represented another dimension of her institutional impact. Foreign military officers now attended courses at the Vasquez Institute, learning methods that enhanced their own operational effectiveness while strengthening cooperative relationships with American forces. NATO allies had requested Elena's consultation on operations involving complex environmental challenges or situations requiring extended patience and analytical approaches. Her methods were becoming part of the international framework for addressing security challenges that conventional military thinking struggled to resolve. The personal satisfaction Elena derived from her institutional success was evident in her continued connection to the soldiers whose careers followed paths similar to her own. She maintained regular contact with graduates of the Environmental Operations Training Program, mentoring personnel whose unconventional backgrounds provided capabilities that standard military training didn't develop. Her office walls displayed photographs and letters from soldiers whose careers had been transformed through recognition and development of talents that conventional systems had overlooked. Elena's final major operation as an active participant rather than strategic planner took place in the mountains of Afghanistan, where a small team of intelligence operatives had been conducting surveillance of terrorist leadership gatherings. The mission had been proceeding successfully when severe weather and coordinated enemy responses had created circumstances that conventional extraction methods couldn't address. Elena's personal involvement in the rescue operation reflected both her continued operational capabilities and her commitment to the soldiers whose lives depended on the methods she had developed. The rescue operation in Afghanistan became a textbook example of how Elena's approaches could succeed when conventional military methods reached their limitations. Her coordination of the extraction required integrating weather analysis, cultural understanding, and tactical patience to move the endangered team through hostile territory to extraction points that enemy forces couldn't predict or monitor effectively. The operation's success demonstrated that Elena's capabilities remained as relevant and effective as they had been during her early career, despite her elevation to strategic responsibilities. The intelligence gathered during the Afghanistan operation provided information that influenced counterterrorism policy for years afterward, demonstrating that Elena's methods continued to produce strategic benefits that extended far beyond immediate tactical success. Her ability to achieve both personnel recovery and mission completion under impossible circumstances reinforced her reputation as someone whose capabilities could address challenges that defeated conventional approaches, regardless of the operational context or geographic environment. Elena's retirement ceremony at the Pentagon reflected recognition that transcended normal military traditions. The president personally presented her with the Defense Distinguished Service Medal, acknowledging contributions that had, quote, fundamentally enhanced American military effectiveness and national security. Her speech accepting the award focused not on personal achievement, but on institutional changes that would continue benefiting future generations of military personnel whose capabilities didn't fit conventional patterns. The establishment of the Elena Vasquez Foundation for Military Innovation ensured that her influence would continue long after her active military service ended. The foundation funded research into unconventional military capabilities, provided scholarships for personnel whose backgrounds suggested they might possess talents that standard military training didn't develop, and supported programs that identified and nurtured innovative approaches to security challenges. Elena's legacy had been institutionalized in ways that guaranteed its continuation. Elena's memoir, titled Patience and Precision: Lessons from an Unconventional Military Career, became required reading at military academies and training institutions worldwide. Her detailed analysis of how environmental awareness, analytical thinking, and tactical patience could achieve results that speed and aggression couldn't match provided frameworks that influenced military thinking across multiple generations. The book's success demonstrated that Elena's methods had value that extended far beyond the specific operations where she had applied them. The continuing references to Elena as the ghost in enemy intelligence communications reflected lasting recognition of her impact on global military dynamics. Foreign military planners continued to modify their approaches specifically to counter methods associated with her operational philosophy, demonstrating that her influence on international security extended far beyond American military effectiveness. Elena had become a strategic factor that adversaries had to consider when planning their own operations. Elena's final assessment of her military career reflected the perspective of someone who had witnessed and influenced fundamental changes in how military institutions recognized and developed unconventional talent. The most important lesson is that different doesn't mean inferior, and that institutional flexibility can unlock capabilities that rigid adherence to conventional standards will never discover, she wrote in her farewell message to the military. Her words captured the essence of transformation that had redefined not just her own career, but the military's understanding of what constituted valuable service. The woman who had once been called Turtle, who had been dismissed as too slow and too careful for military effectiveness, had become a legend whose methods influenced operations worldwide, and whose legacy would continue shaping military thinking for generations. Elena's story proved that sometimes the greatest revolutions begin with individuals who refuse to accept that being different means being wrong, and who persist until their unique capabilities find the recognition and application they deserve. The military Elena left behind was fundamentally different from the institution she had entered as a struggling recruit. Training programs now valued analytical thinking alongside physical capability. Selection criteria included environmental awareness and cultural sensitivity, and operational planning incorporated patience and adaptation as tactical virtues rather than weaknesses. Elena's revolution had been comprehensive, permanent, and focused on ensuring that future soldiers with unconventional capabilities would find opportunities to contribute rather than barriers to overcome. As Elena transitioned to civilian life, she carried with her the satisfaction of knowing that her individual persistence had created institutional changes benefiting countless personnel whose talents might otherwise have been overlooked or undervalued. Her legacy lived not just in the operations she had personally conducted, but in the transformed military that now recognized and developed the full spectrum of human capabilities, rather than limiting itself to conventional definitions of military excellence. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.